Wow. What a great introduction. Hope I can live up to that. Again, my name is Colby Coash, and I put my notes out here because I just kept thinking of things I wanted to share with you. But if you look at the back of the program and how my name is spelled, C-O-A-S-H, which is pronounced Coash, right? And Senator Chambers, who had that nice quote about me, and I have to give credit where credit is due. Senator Chambers was the senator who introduced the repeal bill. That was his bill. It was not my bill. And in Nebraska, we have a different system where we have 49 votes. That's it. 49 senators. We have one house. Okay? So it's a very different situation, but we have very common things that I will share with you as we go through this. Now, Senator Chambers is the longest-serving member of the state legislature in Nebraska. I'll talk more about him as we go. But during the course of a debate, it wasn't this debate, but I had the unfortunate situation, or fortunate, depending on how you look at it, to sit next to him. And he is known for his great oratory skills, and he filibusters like no other, because he doesn't care, and he just goes about his business, and he has no friends, and he will tell you that, he has no friends. I might consider him a friend, but he wouldn't consider me a friend. But one day he was doing his thing, and he was going off on a filibuster on a bill, and I did one of these. I went, "What did you just say?" Like in my mind, I had this look on my face, like, "What did you just say?" And without a beat, he goes, "Let me tell you something about Senator Coash." And keep in mind, sometimes the media is there. It's, of course, all recorded. And he says, if you took his name, and you took the last letter of his last name and put it in second position, second letter, and reversed the vowels, you know what you get? Chaos. So they have called me affectionately Senator Chaos since then, and it certainly fit as we got through this debate. Here's what I want to start with. This was mentioned earlier. I am a storyteller at heart, but I am going to tell you a story, but I want you to think of your own stories, because this debate that we had in Nebraska was, first of all, it started many, many years ago, and I'll talk about that. But it is being won, and it was won, not in great 30-second speeches. It was won in those one-on-one stories, and everybody has a story to tell. And it was those stories that got us to where we were in Nebraska. But I want to share my own story. So I'll date myself a little bit. I grew up in a small town in Nebraska. And as it happens in a lot of places, I came to Lincoln, Nebraska, the capital city, to go to the university, be a Cornhusker, right? And as it turned out, I moved to Lincoln, went to school there, got my undergraduate degree there, got my first job there, met my wife there, and just kind of sunk roots in the Lincoln community. But in my freshman year of college, I almost said high school, my freshman year of college, and I'm going to date myself, it was the early 90s, 95, I was sitting in the dorms in college, and my friend and a couple of my friends from the dorm came up to me and said, "Hey, Coash, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm studying." I really wasn't studying, but that's what I said. I said, "I'm studying." He says, "Well, quit that. We're going to go down to the state penitentiary," which was also in Lincoln. And I had just moved into the dorm. I'm a small town agriculture race kid. I didn't really know Lincoln that well. And they said, "Get in the car. We're going to go down to the penitentiary." And I was like, well, that sounded better than studying. So I jumped in the car, and I drove down to the state penitentiary. And on the way, I asked my friends, I said, what are we doing? And he said, "Well, there's an execution." And I said, "I got to watch an execution?" Turn the car, and they said, no, they're not going to let you in, dummy. But there's a bunch of people going down, and we're going to go down there to be with them. So I was kind of hijacked in the back seat of the car, and we got there, and at the state penitentiary, this big parking lot, and they weren't letting people in, but there, in the parking lot, there was a security fence separating it into two halves. And we had to park blocks away and walk because there were so many cars and so many people around the penitentiary. And we walked up, and a security guard caught us, and he said, "Hey, hold on a second. Which side are you guys on?" And we said, "What do you mean, which side are we on?" And they said, "Well, you here for the execution?" "Yeah." "Well, you want it to happen?" we kind of looked around. Well, yeah, what happened? Because the guy who was being executed had done some pretty horrendous things, and we thought, well, be a part of that. So they shoved us to one side of the parking lot that was separated by a security fence. And I'll describe that in a moment. Now, on the other side was a group of people who some had candles, some were carrying Bibles. They were quiet, and they were just kind of walking around, consoling each other, a lot of tears, a lot of prayers. I saw a lot of rosaries, and they were just kind of being a quiet witness to life. And as a young college student, I was on this other side. And I went to this side where there was a band playing. There was several grills, cooking food, barbecuing. There was like this big clock that somebody had made, and every minute they had moved something, right? And later I found out that's what you have on like New Year's Eve, right? People would count down to New Year's Eve. Well, they were using this clock to count down to the execution, which at that time was going to be at midnight. And people were drinking beer, right? And they were partying. I mean, you wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between what I was participating in at 11 o'clock at night and what you might see an hour before a Husker football game. You couldn't tell the difference, but that's where I was. And at midnight, everybody cheered and banged and shot off fireworks. They shot off fireworks, and people cheers, and they guzzled their beers. And then the security came by, and they said, "You guys got to go now. This is over." And the execution actually had taken place. And I went home, back to at the time I went to the dorm. And on the way home, I was kind of reflecting on what I just participated in. And I said to myself, and I didn't feel good about it, I got to be honest with you. It gnawed in my heart. I was like, that certainly wasn't what my parents had raised me to be. Right? That was the opposite of what they had tried to instill in me with values. But at the time, it was just a party. And I didn't feel good about it. That was my story. And that stuck in my heart, and it stuck in my head. And at the time, I was 19. I had no idea that public office was going to be a part of my future. But when I got into public office, that became that story. And that's what I started to share with people. And I said, look, you'll never have the opportunity to do what I did. In 1995, when I was there, they only did one other execution in 1997. And because of that circus that I was a part of, they moved the execution to 3 a.m. to try to keep that riffraff out. And that was the last one, 1997, by the way. But that became part of my story. And that became a powerful part of the message of this movement, that there was an ugly side to what state government was about to do. And even if they weren't going to have a big party, there's ugliness to it. And I was able to share that story. But I didn't know I was going to be a state senator at the time. Maybe I did, but it wasn't something I was thinking about. And, I'm going to fast forward to short 15 years later. I'm a relatively young senator. And 15 years later, I get elected. Nobody on the campaign trail really asked me if I was for or against the death penalty. They certainly asked me if I was for or against, if I was pro-life. We're a pro-life state, and that was important to people. It was important to me, and I am pro-life. And, they said, what do you think about the death penalty? And I campaigned very honestly. So I don't think I can reconcile my ideas about the unborn with the condemned. I have to feel consistent in my own heart. So I don't want to have the death penalty. And in my first year of the legislature, and I thought, well, I'll just say that, right? It's never going to come up. Year one. They say, Coash, you're going to be on the Judiciary Committee. Great. Heavy lift is the Judiciary Committee. Well, we had a pretty horrific bank robbery about 2 years before I got into the legislature. And there was a couple of guys that were sitting on death row, and they were sentenced when all we had was the electric chair. And so one of the first bills I remember as a freshman senator was this bill to change the method from electric chair to lethal injection. And I voted against it. And I said, I don't want anybody killing anybody, right? But it hit me right square in the eye, right? And this was 7 years ago. And I voted against it. It made it out, and it passed, and the governor signed it. even though I voted against it the whole way. And I kind of felt, well, that's just that's part of it. I'm not going to win everything. And then remember Ernie Chambers I was talking about. Well, 38 years he introduced a repeal of the death penalty. 38 years he did this. Sometimes all it had was a hearing. Most of the times all it had was a hearing. But what I decided, what happened to me, let me back up a second. There were meetings like this for years. People like yourselves getting together. For years they were getting together. I never knew about it. God's honest truth, until this year, I did not know there was an organization just like this one in our state that had been laying groundwork for years. And I guarantee they were sitting here saying the very same things that you are hearing today, which is, hey, we're close, we can get this. And in Nebraska, oh my, I mean, that's why I'm here. People want to know, Nebraska? Really? I mean, I've been on, I was mentioning this earlier, I was in Time Magazine. I'm going to be on the Daily Show, I think. People want to, this story is starting to resonate, but in the middle of it, I didn't know that was going to happen. But there were people doing this that I had no idea. But Senator Chambers, for 38 years, had introduced this bill. It never went anywhere. And when I started to serve with him, he introduced it again. And it never went anywhere. And it was this year, 2015, and I decided, you know what? Voting for the repeal, for me, wasn't going to be enough, right? And maybe it was the fact that we had term limits in Nebraska, and I wasn't going to get much of another chance. You know, I'm not going to run for office again. I can't. I guess I could sit out and run. It's unlikely I'll do so. But I said, you know what? This year, voting for the repeal just isn't going to be enough for me. And I remember the time I went back to my wife. I said, and her name's Ron. I said, Ron, I said, this is the year. I said, I'm not going to just vote for this. If I do nothing else, I'm going to get rid of this thing, right? And maybe it's, you know, like you're my therapist right now, right? So, you know, maybe it's just the guilt I felt, the participation that I had as a young college student. Just it's not on me. But I told my wife, I said, I'm going to do it. And this year, when Ernie introduces it, because he has done it every year he's introduced a repeal bill. He didn't care what happened. He didn't care what the membership was like. He didn't care who was in, who was out. He introduced it every year. That was his mission. And I said, this year, despite our differences, I said, I'm going to help him. I have to. And so I made the decision at that point to do that. So here's the question you're all here to ask me, right? Like, Nebraska, how the hell did you do this? Well, and I'm not going to, I don't like to take credit, but what happened was it took a guy like me who had some conservative credentials, who could share a story that became the tipping point. Because for 38 years, when the bill was introduced, it was framed in a particular way. And I'll share the way it was framed for 38 years. It was framed as the death penalty is the wrong thing to do. The death penalty affects minorities more than it affects anybody else. It is distributed, initiated, however you want to say it, in a very inconsistent manner. And then in addition to all that narrative, they said, and it's not used very well either. And some innocent people somewhere have been executed. Now, what I will tell you in Nebraska, there's not one we have a death row now. We don't have a legal means of executing them. But there's not one person on Nebraska's death row that anybody thinks is innocent, including the people sitting there. Okay, so we don't have that problem. There's nobody sitting there going, yeah, I didn't do it. They all know they did it. They all will tell you they did it. They don't want to be killed, but they will tell you that they're not innocent for the crime they put them. But I decided I was going to engage in this issue. And I started to listen to the narrative. Keep in mind, for 7 years, I had sat through hearings, including the change in method. And I'd listened to the arguments. And these arguments would get out onto the floor of the legislature and just get squished. And I said, well, these arguments aren't working for people. And for 38 years, they were giving the same argument. I said, we have to change the narrative here. So I started to kind of look inward first, and I said, look, just wanting to do what I feel is the right thing isn't going to be enough. So what I did is I said, look, let's take the death penalty, and let's put it up against what we as conservative legislators say are our values. And let's see how those two things mash up. So what do we say as conservatives, right? First thing we say, and we had a whole crop of new senators in the body, and they had just gotten off the campaign trail. This is January, 10 months ago. And they had all come off the campaign trail. And I didn't see them, but I knew what their campaign literature said. Their campaign literature said, look, you send me to Lincoln, you elect me, I'll go to the Capitol, and I'll find, and I'll root out, and I'll get rid of any government program that's ineffective and not working. I'll just get rid of it. They said that to their constituents. And they said, I'll be like a hound dog. One of my colleagues had a dog on his campaign cards. I'll sniff it out. I'll sniff out bad programs. And I'll get rid of it. I'll save you, the taxpayer, some money. So I went to those of my colleagues, and they were on both sides of the aisle. And I said, here's what you said. Here's our death penalty, and we haven't used it in almost 20 years. Tell me that's not a broken program. Tell me that's not an inefficient program. Tell me that's not a program that's costing money. And they'd say, well, yeah, it's costing money. I said, what are you getting for the money? Anybody getting executed? I said, no. I said, go tell your constituents you lied to them. Because that's a broken program you promised to get rid of. So that got some people thinking. Some candidates had run on a platform, I'm pro-life, I'm going to see that through. Well, that was a pretty easy thing to do. Hey. Now, there was always arguments back, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Then I started to talk to my conservative colleagues, and I said, look, we're supposed to be the party that's the check against too powerful government. We're supposed to be the party that says, government's getting too powerful. That's our job. We're supposed to be that check. Here's your opportunity to say, no, this is too big of a deal. You're going to give our state the power to do this? Kidding me? Now, we had a little bit of a crisis in our prison system about that time, where our prison had accidentally let out about 200 inmates. Some a couple months early, some a couple years early. I said, look at these jokers. They can't even count. You're going to give them the power to execute something? That's too much power. So a good politician, right? We never let a good crisis go to waste. Right? That's what we said to him, right? And here's another story, and this was a powerful one. There was a woman, and some of you have heard of her. Her name's Miriam, and one of the men who was on death row at the time killed her brother. Didn't just kill him in a pretty horrific way. Killed her brother and a small child as well. And that was 35 years ago. Now, a little side note to that story. The county attorney who lived in the county when those murders occurred pushed for the death penalty, as was his right at the time, made that decision. It is a small county, very rural county, by the way. I mean, everybody knew everybody. And it rocked. I mean, I was a young kid, but I remember how much that particular incident rocked that county. And at that time, he decided to pursue the death penalty. In order to prosecute that death penalty, that county had to put liens on its road graders and snowplows. And they got it. That guy got sentenced to death. Never said he didn't do it, but he got sentenced to death. And he sat there, and I got to know his victim's sister. And she came to me early on in my legislative career, and she said, listen, Colby, Senator Coash, when something bad happens to your loved one, and the state says, for what happened to your loved one, here's what the state's going to do. They're going to kill that guy. And then 35 years goes by, and the state doesn't do it. Tell me where the justice is for my family. Now, she didn't speak for all victims. I got to tell you, in Nebraska, there were victims very much on the opposite side of this debate. But that story stuck with me. When she said, this is about a state's promise. A state's promise to its citizens. And she'd look at, she'd say, you're the senator, you're the state. And I am. She said, you're the state, and you promised. This is what would happen to my brother's killer. And you didn't make good on your promise. Tell me how I'm supposed to feel about that. And I thought, you know what, you're right. We didn't make, even if I disagreed with the promise, it was a promise, and we didn't make good on it. Ironically enough, the guy who killed her brother died during the debate. Natural causes, 35 years, he got cancer, died in prison. The other thing that she said, and this was part of her story, and she's given me permission to share this story because it's an important part of this narrative. She said, look, every time you guys down there, every time you talk about the death penalty, and her brother, it had been introduced 38 times, her brother was gone for 35 years. So for 35 years, she had been hearing this debate. And she said, you talk about this killer, the crime he committed, the horrible things that happened to my family, and nobody ever mentions my brother's name. But they're sure will, and my colleagues in the legislature were more than happy to recount details of a lot of crime. Because that became an emotional thing. And it worked for some people. Got some people moved. But what happened in Nebraska was this. We said, you know what? We're supposed to be, and I would say we as the conservatives, we're supposed to be the party of justice, right? Where's the justice in our system? So we put the death penalty up against a bunch of principles that we campaigned on. We said, this isn't matching what we said we would do. And so at the end of the day, we were able to pull enough of my conservative colleagues over to the repeal side because they understood what we were talking about. And they took this debate, these are my words, but from their hearts to their heads. And they said, we're just going to be, Nebraskans, we're very pragmatic people. And I'll be honest with you, if you went to any Nebraskan today, just called up any random Nebraskan and said, hey, do you think we ought to have a death penalty? Most Nebraskans would say, well, yeah, we ought to have a death penalty. You do something really bad, you ought to have something really bad done to you. But then you follow it up and you say, but does that change if you knew that we haven't used it in almost 20 years? And most Nebraskans go, oh yeah, well, hell, get rid of it. I mean, that's kind of the mindset, but you have to share that story. Okay, you can't rely on the media to do it. You have to share that story. So, how did we do that? Well, that was my part, right? I had to get conservative colleagues to see things in a different way. The way that had been presented for 38 years wasn't working. I had to change that narrative, and I was successful in doing that. And all those reasons I just gave you, some worked for some didn't work for others, and that was what my job was. Okay? But I will tell you, I didn't do this alone. I found out quickly that there's a whole group of Nebraskans out there, like there's a group of you, who said, we don't want this either. And your reasons can be just as varied as the reasons I just gave you. I mean, everybody came to this issue however they came to it, right? And the first thing I'll tell you is that, my Democrat progressive colleagues, they say, what the hell took you guys so long? Because, they kind of felt like they were the only ones marching this drum for a long time, right? And to their credit, nobody took ownership over the issue, at least in the body I was working with. Everybody said, hey, I don't care what's got you here, thanks for being here. Okay? But I will tell you that we had to get over a little bitty hump, and it was a small hump, but we had to get over this little hump of some people saying, hey, this is our issue. And I actually had to answer this question. Well, you're opposing the death penalty for the wrong reasons. So, really? And I go, sorry. Sorry I don't oppose it for the same reason you do, but I oppose it when we work together. And we got over that hump very, very quickly. Okay? Just something to keep your eyes on. But I will tell you, so we had these meetings. And a counterpart in Nebraska, it would be like John Michael's counterpart in Nebraska, would come to these meetings. I was a senator, and imagine this, if you will. We had the executive director of the ACLU at the table. In walks Catholic bishop. They sit right next to each other, and earlier that day they had just gone after each other, right, on some other issue. But they sat next to each other and they said, well, "This is an issue we're going to work together on." And neither one of them ever thought of doing anything different. They were very principled and focused on their mission. And they would sit there and they would strategize that. Now, one of the things, and this is the message I learned late, but not late, but right in the middle of the debate. So I'd be in the middle of the legislature, and I go to my colleague, and I really, things were looking, it was all, look, this was left out of the story. We had 0 votes left over. 0. Like, you were 1 short, we had 0 to give, right? We had 0 votes to get over this hump. And I would be working with my colleagues, and maybe they had voted on 1 round of debate. Now, we actually had 2 extra, and then the governor pulled off 2. Well, we had 3 extra, and he pulled off 2. Right? So we had 0 left. And I would talk to my colleagues, and this is where the real magic happened. I'll take credit for what I did. I was persuasive and tenacious as all can be, but here's where the magic happened. I would talk to one of my colleagues, Senator Seiler comes to mind, and I'd say, "Hey, debate's coming. We're getting ready to start this debate." I say, "You doing okay? We do this as legislators, right? Doing okay?" Which is code for, are you still going to vote the way that we voted for last time, or are you going to change your vote? That's what it meant. You doing okay? And he'd go, I don't know. I got a call from the governor. Okay. I said, what else is going on? I got my phone's blowing up down in my office. I got a handful of calls. And I got to be honest with you, the opposition to this movement, one of their strategies was to paint this issue as being totally out of touch with every citizen in our state. If you voted for the repeal, you were nuts, because every citizen wanted the death penalty. That's what they would say. Everybody wants it, right? And so when I would talk to Senator Seiler, for example, he'd say, "How you doing?" He'd say, "I don't know. I got a bunch of calls. Governor's called me in. I'm going to the governor. It's kind of going to the principal's office." You feel like you're in charge. And we only have 49 senators, so he calls us in all the time and thanks us, yells at us, pokes at us, whatever, but he, I could feel he's, my term was squishy, right? Oh man, he could change his vote. And I don't have any left. I don't have a backup. I need this. I need every vote. And so what I would do is I would, I'd say, "All right, well, hang in there, man." And then I'd zoom out of the chamber, and I'd go to my John Michael's peer, and her name was Stacy, and I'd say, Stacy, Senator Seiler, squishy. And here's what she did. She had mobilized. And she'd taken years to do this before. She didn't just do it this year. She had done this work for years, and she was ready for me to say, "Senator Seiler, squishy." And she got on the phone to a key person in his district, who got on the phone to dozens of other people in his district. And they started to flood his phone and said, "Don't you change. You stay strong. You represent us, and we want you on this side of it." And all those calls neutralized everything that just happened. And if that had not happened, he could have changed. Because as an elected official, you want to feel like you are doing the will of the people who sent you to do their business. And the governor, who has a pulpit much bigger than any state senator, would say at every press conference, "You all need to call your senator and tell them they're crazy. Voting to abolish the death penalty is the dumbest thing. You call and tell them." And they did. But Stacy had people in every single senator's district who would counter that. And that did not start in 2015. That started years before I became in the legislature, before she became in her position, but it was the magic that got us to where we were. And that was the coolest thing that I've seen. And so I checked in with Senator Seiler, after I, kind of blown the whistle. And he never did that. And I did that a dozen times. Because this was an issue that people, they're thinking about everything. What's the right thing to do? Is this going to be a factor in my next election? Is the governor going to give me, everybody's just going through every scenario, right? But I did that a dozen times, and that was where the real work happened. Okay. So let me end with this, and I'll be glad to take some questions from you. A year ago, today, well, not today, I don't know if it's today, but I guarantee you, a year ago in Nebraska, there was a group of people going, I don't know if we can get this done this year. And I guarantee there were 49 other states saying, well, if any state that's going to do it, Nebraska will be the last state to do it. Right? But Nebraska was the last state to do it. And I've said this a few times tonight. I had no idea when I was immersed in that bubble of the legislature that you get into, that the world was watching. And you all were paying attention to what monkey business we were doing in our little state. But my message, my closing message to you is this: don't lose heart. There were people in Nebraska. Arguably, it was a tough climb. I mean, it's still a climb, but it was a tough climb in our state. And if we can do it there, I know you can do it here. And you will be sitting here in a very short amount of time, celebrating the work that you've spent all this time up to this moment doing. And I hope you'll invite me back to celebrate with you. Thank you very much.
That was inspiring. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. Can you take a couple of minutes here?
There's plenty of time.
Can we?
There's plenty of time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I wonder if the fact that we have a unicameral legislature and we have a 400-person legislature, and how you can accomplish
Did people hear that?
Yeah, can you repeat the questions?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, there's the fact that they have a 49-person unicameral legislature, and we have 1,000 people in our legislature.
All right, so you heard the question, and of course that makes a difference, right? Of course that makes a difference. I'm one guy. I pressed, at worst I had to press 48 other people, right? And that's a small number compared to what you have to deal with here. But I'll tell you this, if I can do it, if I can press 48 other people, you can get a couple of people in your representative to press 48 people. You just have to do it to scale, right? And those arguments work, whether you're arguing it with 49 people or a couple hundred. So, does it have a? Sure, it matters. Sure, it matters. Here's what I'll tell you. There's, I mentioned this, and I'll repeat it. We had a whole new crop of senators come in this year, and that gave me the opportunity to start right away and say, hey, I don't know what you heard about this, but let me tell you about the death penalty before you start getting fed, right? Well, you got a whole new crop coming in every 2 years. You have that opportunity. So my message is not to waste it.
How does law enforcement react to this?
Law enforcement?
Yes.
The question was, how did law enforcement react? So every bill in our legislature gets a public hearing, right? Which I understand is the way it is here, which is actually the exception, not the rule. What I've found out across the country, that in a lot of states, if the speaker doesn't like the bill, you don't get a hearing, right? So we had a hearing, and I'm not sure why, but of course we had and I affectionately call them the usual suspects, would come, and we would start with the proponents, people who wanted repeal, and we had the faith community show up, and we had the equal justice argument show up. We had those, I don't know, just general citizens who, much like yourself, said, look, stop killing people. I don't want to live in a state that kills people. We had that. Then we had the opposition, right? In the opposition, I remember this last year, one guy shows up. And he happened to be a county prosecutor in our largest county that has the most crime. And here's what it took. It took some smart legislators, and I won't take a lot of credit for this because I had colleagues who did a better job at it than I did. But the county prosecutor showed up and he says, hey, look, we think we ought to have the death penalty because some crimes are really, really bad. And we had some bad crimes. You had bad crimes. I mean, crimes that make the front page, right? And the legislatures, we didn't let him off the hook. And we said, look, what about this guy over here that got an 80-year sentence? Then that's pretty bad. You didn't seek the death penalty on him. And in Nebraska, we had a county system. And what that means is that the county prosecutor in every state, or in every county gets the discretion. I don't know if that's the way it is here. But they can choose to seek the death penalty or choose not to. And so I asked the county attorney, I said, why? Obviously you like the death penalty, but what if your colleague in the next county doesn't? Aren't you supposed to be for justice? Where's the equality in that? The law enforcement initially was absent from this, right? Now, what's interesting about that is the governor has now pulled them in to say that we need the death penalty to keep people safe. And my question is, what danger are those 10 jokers now sitting on our death row to anybody? But that's kind of his mantra, is it's a safety issue. But we had some pretty brave county sheriff, for example, showed up and said, hey, this isn't going to help. But it's a tough thing to vote against law enforcement as a politician. You always want to be on the right side of those who serve and protect. But that was our experience.
Did your law have retroactive effect and wipe out the death sentences on those 10 people on death row?
Good question. So the question was, did our law have a retroactive effect? I was the primary sponsor of a cleanup amendment, and we never got to it actually because the opponents kept filibustering it. We couldn't get to a vote on it. But in Nebraska, here's what we had. We put what we called intent language. And then the bill we passed and overrode the governor on said is the intent of the legislature that anybody currently serving a sentence of death would now serve life without the possibility of parole. But it was very clear it was the intent. And the reason we had to do it that way in our state was that was a sentence imposed by a different branch of government, and we didn't feel we had the authority to change a sentence handed down by a judge in good standing in our state. But by taking away the means, we defaulted to life without possibility of parole. Now our governor has taken that and said, hey, I don't care what you did at the legislature. I still got 10 guys sitting here. I'm going to kill them. That's what he said. He said that we're going to do that. Now he can't do it. Not because of the law. And this was something I wanted to share with you because I think this is very important because I've noticed this in other states. He has not been able to get the drugs needed to carry out an execution. Okay? He's not been able to do it. He keeps getting turned down at the border by the FDA. Now I'm going to tell you there's a reason for that we can't get them, and there's a reason that there's so many executions happening in places like Texas. Because in this debate, I kept saying, I said this dozens of times, this is a broken system. We should just get rid of it. That's what we said we would do. And so my opponents were very quick to come to me, and these were opponents within and outside the legislature, and say, damn it, Coash, quit saying it's broken and trying to get rid of it. Say it's broken and fix it. They said that to me. And that's a fair question. That is a fair question. And Texas always got brought up. They said, whether it was a legislator or a citizen on the street, a constituent, they'd say, just do what Texas is doing. And I would look at them and I would say, we can do that. I mean, Nebraska has the ability to do what Texas is doing. In Texas, for example, the drugs that are procured, the authority to get them rests solely with the Director of Corrections. In other words, that Director of Corrections in Texas can do whatever he or she wants, and they can do it outside of the public eye. They have shielded themselves from any type of transparency in the process. And even my colleague and good friend, who in my very first year changed the method from electric chair to lethal injection, said, this issue is too important to hide from its citizens. Okay, this is too important. The stakes are too high. And so in our law, even before we changed it, if you're going to execute somebody, it's a public process. And what I mean by that is where you get the drugs, you have to have a hearing, you have to be able to produce that. Because what happened in Nebraska, because our governor got caught, right? He tried to order them, and the media would get a hold of it, groups like you would get a hold of it, and they'd say, oh, they're trying to order it from this place. And they'd call that place overseas and say, hey, just so you know, if you send that drug to Nebraska, they're going to kill somebody with it. And that drug maker would say, oh, wait a minute. I produce drugs. We produce drugs to heal people, not to kill people. And not one pharmaceutical of good repute company would ever want to say, we produce drugs that kill people. They want to be the next company that produces the cure to cancer, right? And so in Nebraska, we have to tell them what we're using it for. We have to do it in the public eye. In Texas, they don't have to do that. And so I would tell people, I would kick back, and this is good for you legislators to understand. I'd say, look, if you want to hide it from the citizens, we can probably get the drugs. But even in Nebraska, as adamant as some people were on implementing the death penalty, they were not willing to give up a level of transparency in order to do it. Because a government that will hide that from you, what else will they hide it from you? And I think that's a message that would resonate here, right? Is that, so my caution to you is this, and I'm not sure where you stand, but I just did a similar thing in North Carolina a few weeks ago. North Carolina, their House and Senate just passed a bill to hide the procurement of drugs from the public. They call it a death penalty secrecy bill. I mean, secrecy was in the name of the bill. Okay? And those legislators got away with it. We would never get away with that in Nebraska. Even those, I'm sure there'll be some bill next year to try to do something, but I highly doubt you'll see any bill that would hide it. Because and we could execute, the governor could probably get an execution done if he could hide it. Right? I mean, I'm convinced in Texas they're just mixing up some bleach and stuff from the basement of the prison. I mean, I think that, because nobody knows. Because they're not required to tell anybody. So I will tell you this, don't just keep an eye on the repeal bills. You keep an eye on those things in your legislative body that would hide it from the citizens. The more it's open, the harder it will be. Right? And North Carolina is a good example. They went backwards, and they're trying, they're fighting a good fight, but just keep that in mind, because you don't want to have that happen here.
You mentioned term limits, so I'm not sure if this is applicable, but can you talk about, you mentioned there were new senators who you got early on.
Right.
How would you or would you suggest approaching people who had already voted against it and were concerned about seeing themselves as flip floppers?
Right. You got to give them new arguments. Right? You give them a new argument. And especially with those conservative senators, you say, look, because if you dig into it, they'll think it was their Republicanness that allowed them to vote to keep the death penalty. And what you have to show them is, you don't lose your Republican card by voting for repeal. And in fact, you don't vote for repeal in spite of being a Republican. You can vote for repeal because you're a Republican.
But does that argument have to come from another Republican?
It did. That was from me.
No, serious, for us.
For me. But here's what happened. Long before I really went on record, I had a group like this talking to me. Right? I had the opportunity to hear the benefit of those arguments before I went on record. And so the strategy, if you want to get into that, is get in early, right? And that's a daunting task here because you get a lot of people to get in early. But sure, I think term limits played a part in it. I know I had colleagues who voted against repeal because they thought it would affect them in their next election. But what I was able to demonstrate was, I'm a Republican, I voted for it, never came up once. My district's different than every other district, but I was able to say, look, I'm not going to hide from it. I'm not going to lead with it either, but I'm going to say, look, when I voted for this, I did it because I was a Republican or a conservative guy. I didn't go against it. I looked at my principles, and that's how I got to where I was. And in Nebraska, that worked. But it happens at this level. You can't really get there in a 30-second ad. Right?
Would you talk about the referendum and how you think that's going to go?
Yeah, okay, so our governor, and in deference to him, he was a friend of mine, he is a friend of mine. He helped me in my 2 campaigns. I mean, we're not enemies by any means, but he's a man of means. Our governor owns the Chicago Cubs. I don't know if you know that or not. Our governor and his brothers and his dad own the Chicago Cubs. He has money. Okay, so, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. I went to talk to the governor about this before the bill even hit. I said, I'm going to try to get this done. And he didn't believe I could do it. His mistake. But he at the time was a typical Nebraskan and said, I think we should probably keep it. I don't know. I know we're not using it, but I can't be with you on that Coash. I was like, that's fine. Yeah, we're not going to agree on everything. But when we rolled him and overrode his veto, he took that pretty kind of personally. And because he's a man of means, he self-funded a referendum to reverse what the legislature has done. Him and his dad wrote a $300,000 check. And they'll probably write another $300,000 check. And that's just money to do what he wants. I don't agree with it, but so here's where we stand in Nebraska. There's a paid circulators went out, got enough signatures. Now it's caught in the courts again. Again, costing more money. Imagine how much $300,000 would do for the victims of all the folks on death row. But enough signatures were collected. If enough are verified, which hasn't happened yet, it could end up on the ballot not this November, but next November, which could undo what we did. But now it's caught in the court because he didn't list himself as a sponsor, and I just don't know how you give $300,000 to an initiative and say you're not sponsored. So, I think we're going to spend a little bit of time and money. I'm talking about it to people, but here's what, I'll go back to this. When I talk to citizens, and they say, what you dummy, what'd you do? Repeal the death penalty. I said, well, we're not using it, it's costing a bunch of money. Okay, fine. That's really what it came down to, but I had to have those conversations, and so I'm all across the state having those conversations. And, it'll be a little over a year before we know what happens with that referendum. My guess is it'll happen sooner. I think it's going to get thrown out because he screwed up. We'll see what happens. Well, it had costed a bunch of money. The appeals had costed money. Trying to get the drugs before has costed money. And I'm fond of pointing out to people, the taxpayer picks up both sides of this bill. Because these jokers on death row aren't hiring private attorneys. State funded both sides. So we would tell them, hey, it's costing money. And interestingly enough, a couple of years ago when we were going down this effort, we knew it was going nowhere, so we tried to change the bill to a study, and the opponents killed it because they knew what it would come back at. They knew it would come back and cost more money. But North Carolina, of all places, Duke University just did a great study that said it's going to cost this much more money. I just think we could do better with victims and things of that nature with that kind of money.
I may have wanted to ask a question, this is my second question, but on a totally different sort of personal note, having worked with people that have approached this for different reasons, have you changed your mind on any of those other reasons that didn't bring you to the table?
Of course. Did my mind change?
Not about abolishing the death penalty. You mentioned in your speech that you were accused of wanting to abolish it for the wrong reason.
Yeah, yeah.
And my question is whether now, having worked together with people that came to the table for different reasons, whether you've adopted each other's reasons and seen commonality in those ways.
Yeah, what I would say is those of us who came to the table, we kind of all broadened our palette as reasons, right? But it, when early on in my career, when people would say, well, don't have the death penalty because it's not used judiciously or not used equally. I'd say, well, tough breaks. He still did it. I don't care, And people would say, well, it's cruel and unusual. And I was like, well, yeah, well, what he did was cruel and unusual. And I'm not really, to this day, I'm not really concerned about an inmate feeling pain. That's not my concern. I just want to have a good government that's responsive to its people, and doing the right thing. And so, I guess I didn't come around to every single reason, but I certainly broadened my palette, and that was helpful to me and my colleagues and people who started here go, you mean I can be against it for justice reasons and save money? Okay, good. So that was a good thing that happened for us.
One more question.
Sure.
I have a question for Mr. Coash. You mentioned gaining national attention. You were talking about Jon Stewart. I'm wondering, in Nebraska, was there a strong social media presence in the campaign to abolish the death penalty? Did young people get involved and put pressure on?
Yeah, in Nebraska, there wasn't really a strong. It was all grassroots. We're like you are very close to our constituents, and so I didn't really care what was on the news. I cared what the people who elected me to be there thought, and I think that's the way it was for all of my colleagues. The media that I mentioned happened after we appealed, and everybody's going, "Holy cow, what did you do?" And I had no idea that the world was watching, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. And I'm happy to share that message. I mean, this is just for me icing on the cake to come out and try to spread what we did. One of my ding dong colleagues came and said, "You can't repeal it because then every other state will think they can do it." Bingo! But the short answer to your question is we didn't have much of a media. Media covered it. I certainly did my fair share of media. It didn't take long for people to figure out I was kind of calling the shots on the inside. So I was able to do it from that perspective. Thank you all very much.